Hello everyone, welcome to another video. Today we are starting a new saga and it will be about monsters. Yes, I know that the spooky season is supposedly over, but I don't know. I like me some spooky season all year around as long as the weather allows it. I mean, can you be spooky when it's sunny? I don't know. Someone let me know. But anyway, so we will be reading something that I was inspired. I have actually been quite a bit absent for a while, and that's because I was feeling very much uninspired. I did not know what to do with my videos, what kind of videos to film and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, then I'm just not going to film. And I know that many of you must have unclicked by now. I'm also filming on a new camera setup and I have no idea where to look. Just FYI, this is starting very well. It's going to go great. But anyway, we have a fantastic book that I found and have inspired me. I was actually inspired by a place, like the vibe of the place, and then I made a video on TikTok. Yes, I do have a TikTok. If you like to follow me there, you can find me there. Maybe. I don't know if that's such a good idea. But anyway, I will include the video here, probably without the music, as it can be probably copyrighted. But anyway, it's the song called Lilith. And I was inspired by that. If you don't know who Lilith is, she is supposedly the mother of all demons. In some books, she is mentioned as the first wife or the first woman to be created, first wife of Adam. She was created equally, just as he was, but she was very much independent and not the submissive wife that he wanted, and so she was run out of Eden, and then Eve was created. Anyway, there are many stories about Lilith, but then I was like, you know what would be cool? Reading stories about monsters. And why don't we go into the rabbit hole of nonetheless then women's lore and all kinds of women monsters. So the book that I found for this adventure is called Woman's Lore, 4,000 Years of Sirens, Serpents, and Succumbi. Succumbi? Something. Anyway, and I thought we could read it. Anyway, I will start with the timeline because I do think that it is important that we are placed. I keep looking, honestly. I'm not gonna mention it anymore, but oh well, if I'm not looking at you in this video, know that I was trying. I just don't know where to look. Anyway, let's just start. So, the timeline. The key dates concerning our demons are in the left-hand column of the timeline below. To try to contextualize the 4,000 years of this tradition, the right-hand column contains important dates from history such as the death of Tutankhamun and the beginning of the Crusades. So on the left side we have 2000 to 1500 BC, first Lamashtu, incarnation and amulets. And on the right hand we have 3400 and 3300 BC, earliest form of writing appears in Mesopotamia. And on the right side 1790 BC, Hammurabi becomes the king. We know who he is, or at least I know who he is. Maybe once upon a time you've heard of the code or the law of Hammurabi. Anyway, left side we have 1500 to 1000 BC, writing of the first composite Lamashtu incarnation in Ugarit, the likely Lamashtu text from Hattusa and the Lamashtu text from Emar. I would like them to have given us information on who these demons are. I don't know who Lamashtu is. We will discover. But then on the right hand side we have death of Tutankhamun at 1323 BC, a while ago. So left side again 700 to 600 BC, first Pazuzu incantations and amulets. And on the right hand side we have 631 BC, death of Ashurbanipal. I don't know who that is. Again we have 700 to 600 BC, Egyptian Pazuzu statuette inscribed with the name of Smithson of Pudru. I think we are missing some vocals here. Okay. Anyway, 609 BC, fall of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. That was on the right side. 570 BC, death of Sappho. That's left side. And 500 to 400 BC, Greek way. Then on the right hand side we have 586 BC, sack of Jerusalem. Sack like in sacking. Sack of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar II, and the beginning of the Babylonian captivity. And then we have 500 BC, left side, Lamia shown on a vase with a phallus produced. Interesting. On the right side we have 509 BC, creation of the Roman Republic. Then on the left side again 480 BC, vase showing the sirens as bird-bodied women surrounding Odysseus' ship produced. Okay. On the right side we have 449 BC, Greco-Persian wars. I was feeling like I had lipstick on my teeth, and I did indeed. So as I said, this video is going great. Also my tummy is rumbling. I don't know why. My neighbors are making a lot of noise. Like, I finally got some motivation to film a video again, and here is everyone kind of making it difficult. But anyway, I'm in a good mood. We have a great book. be fine. 405 BC, first performance of Aristophanes' play The Frogs, which mentions Lamia's testicles. Okay, I thought that we were going to read about women demons. Where do the testicles come from? Anyway, 347 BC, death of Plato. And then 323 BC, death of Alexander the Great. That was the right side. 306 BC, the concubine Lamia is captured at the Battle of Salamis by Demetrius. That was the left-hand side. Then we have 300 to 200 BC, likely period in which the poet Irina was writing. Interesting. 281 BC, death of Duris of Samos, who wrote about Lamia. 60 BC, Diodorus Siculus writes Library of History, including his rationalizing account of Lamia. This Lamia person or monster is popular. At the same time, on the right-hand side, we have 44 BC, Julius Caesar, whatever, is assassinated. On the left side, we have 19 BC, Horace writes his Ars Poetica, mentioning Lamia devouring children. On the right-hand side, we have AD 75, writing of the last known cuneiform text. Oh, that's sad. AD 115, death of Dio Chrysostom, who wrote about Lamia, seducing and eating sailors. But then she had testicles as well. That's an interesting situation that we are going to discover hopefully soon. I'm not quite sure how much of the timeline we still have. You know what? Let's go forward because it goes literally to 2020 and we don't really, want all of that. So let's just start reading what matters. So we have the introduction. Set in ancient Greece, John Keats' 1819 poem Lamia tells the story of a beautiful snake woman, the eponymous Lamia, who eponymous? Yes, I read that right. Who falls in love with a handsome charioteer, Lycius, okay? Setting out to ensnare him, Lamia disguises her serpentine nature, seduces him with her woman's lore, and conjures incredible riches out of nowhere so they can live in luxury together. The besotted Lycius, no, it's a Y. Lycius, God knows. The besotted Lycius decides to marry her, but his mentor Apollonium comes to the wedding and exposes Lamia for the snake she is. Her true form revealed, she vanishes with a shriek, leaving Lycius to die of heartbreak without her. It's a strange little poem which stands or falls on whatever the reader enjoys the ambiguity at his heart. Even though Lamia is deceptive, even though she is a literal monster, even though their relationship is described as one of a sweet sin, the sympathies of the poet seem to lie with the lovers, and the reader is left feeling that Apollonium should have mind his own business, and that Lamia and Lycius could have lived together quite happily, if a little sinfully, but had they just been left alone. Keats did not invent Lamia or the story. He lifted it wholesale from Greek myths. The legend of the serpentine Lamia disguising her snake form to seduce a handsome young charioteer and being exposed at her wedding by Apollonium is first attested in around AD 100 and in Philostratus's Life of Apollonium. However, Keats' ambiguity is entirely absent in this earlier version. Far from planning a happy life with her charioteer, Lamia admits she intended to eat him on their wedding night and reveals she lures in attractive young men because their blood tastes the freshest. Marriage was not the only method of the ancient Lamia had for ensnapping her prey. Another story describes her sitting by the sea with bare breasts and a serpentine tail, luring shipwrecked sailors to her with her beautiful face and chest before eating them alive. Lamia was so associated with seduction, there was even an ancient Greek courtesan known by this name. But she was not just a danger to tasty young men, she also caused miscarriages and murdered infants and their mothers. I think that she is maybe like a next version of Lilith or previous version of Lilith, or maybe they are all the same. As we know, everything is kind of copy-paste in these things. Anyway, in most versions of the story, this was because Lamia used to be a mortal woman who was beloved by Zeus and forced by an envious Hera to eat her own children. Turned monstrous by grief and guilt, Lamia went on to kill mothers and their babies out of uncontrollable jealousy that they had what she had lost. Although Lamia is all but forgotten today, her legends are full of the echoes of more familiar myths. A scaly-tailed, bare-breasted seductress luring sailors to their doom has distinctly mermaid-esque undertones. A succubus, but with a habit of murdering infants and their mothers, recalls the Jewish demon Lilith, the first wife of Adam. Fleeing the Garden of Eden when she was refused equality with her husband, Lilith spent her time on the other side of the garden wall, attacking children and pregnant women and seducing men. Lilith was so associated with snakes that was frequently portrayed as a snake of Eden itself. In medieval art, she appears as a hybrid monster with a serpent's tail instead of the legs, and the bare breasts and the face of a beautiful woman holding out the apple of Eve and looking indistinguishable from any mermaid or Lamia. There are suggestions of other lesser-known monsters in Lamia as well. She looks a lot like Melusine, a beautiful snake woman with a knack for marrying into a noble families of medieval Europe, and best known now as the Starbucks logo. Wow, amazing! I did not know that. Melusine, her name. She has similarities with a Byzantine Gello, 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 A snake-tailed ghost of a girl who had died still a virgin and who murdered young mothers and children out of jealousy. Right. There are hints, too, of Abizu, a child and mother-killing monster who was defeated by King Solomon. Lamia even looks a little like a particular version of a prophetic Sibyl who lived in an earthly paradise in an Italian mountain and tried to hide her snake tail from her lovers. The similarities between these serpentine child and mother-killing succumbi are no coincidence. Legends of all these creatures were bound up in each other, were part of a single tradition that has spanned almost the entirety of human history. The purpose of this book is to trace this tradition, to understand how it was passed down through the centuries, how it changed, and why it was so prolific and so widespread. To see where it began, we have to go back nearly 4 millennia. The figure that stares out from a Mesopotamian amulet of the early 1st millennium BC, that is, around 800 BC, looks drastically different from any Lamia or mermaid. Carved into an oblong of grey stone is a demon with the head of a lioness, the talons of a bird, and a human torso. And we know who that is. Although her head and feet are side on, she has twisted her body, so her bare, pendulous breasts are facing outwards, and on either side of her a wild pig and a jackal are standing on their hind legs, preparing to... Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm gonna skip that. On each of her upraised hands, she clutches a snake. This is the Mesopotamian demoness Lamashtu. Okay, so she wasn't the one that I was thinking. I was thinking of Ishtar because Ishtar also has like a snake around her, or like snake legs, whatever. So that's Lamashtu, a monster attested in ancient Mesopotamian texts from as early as 2000 BC, who specialized in activities like choking babies on amniotic fluid and using her terrifyingly long fingers to reach inside women and drag out fetuses before their term. Of course, because we always have to justify all the maladies or anything that we don't understand with a god. In this case, a demon. We can trace a different line of descent from this demon of the 2nd millennium BC down to Lamia, Lilith, and the mermaid, along with a multitude of other serpentine succumbi. To get there, we have to go via a snake-tailed ancestor of Richard the Lionheart, a child-eating wolf monster of ancient Greece, a Roman spirit of headaches, a queen of Sheba, a host of seductive vampires, and a rather sad species of virgin ghosts called Lilith too. Some of the greatest literature and art has been inspired by these creatures, from Keats' poems to the best and worst of the Raphaelite paintings. From vivid collections to early Babylonian incantations to glittering medieval bestiaries and striking sets of Byzantine amulets. From the works of Hans Christian Andersen and Bram Stoker to the novels of Octavia Butler. Spanning 4,000 years, the demons described in this book represent one of the longest surviving and farthest reaching traditions of mankind, appearing in ancient Mesopotamia, in classical Greece and Rome, in Judaism, Christianity, and to some extent, Islam. They have touched 4 continents, picking up smattering of different cultures and civilizations, tying themselves into other legends, constantly shifting and changing, but never so much that we cannot see and follow them through the millennia. They have proven so pervasive that in Jerusalem charms are still sold to ward off one of its most famous demons, Lilith. And as late as the 1980s, inhabitants of the Greek islands were still working to drive away Lamia and Gallo from mothers and their children. Even in cases where outright belief in these creatures have ebbed away, they remain, like the mermaid and Lilith, hugely important cultural touchstones. But demons are never just demons, and stories are never just stories. As Sarah Ellis Johnson, who studied Lamia and Gallo in ancient Greece, put it, they are clay with which people mold images of their fears, a way of expressing our anxieties and hopefully driving them away. The demons examined in this book are no different, and the vast majority of fears that they are reflected concern women. In creatures like the alluring deadly Lamia and Lilith, not to mention the murderous mermaids, we can clearly see men using our monsters to confront their fears of seductive women and their own anxieties about sex. These monsters were used to define womanhood in the negative and to brand as demonic any woman who behaved in a manner deemed insufficiently feminine. Many of them have been repurposed in the 20th century as feminist and LGBTQ icons, so that Lilith, fleeing the Garden of Eden when denied equality, has found herself recast as an ultimate icon of women's liberation, and the mermaid, clearly gender despite of a complete absence of genitals, has become a trans symbol. Perhaps more importantly, the child and mother-killing aspects of these demons were a way for women to explore and understand the risks of pregnancy and labor, as well as the ever-present threat of infant mortality. In a world where a third of children would die before they reach adulthood, and women were almost solely responsible for childcare, and around 8% of women would die in childbirth, and many more would find their bodies permanently damaged by the experience, the charms and spells used to drive the demons away would have afforded women a small measure of control in terrifying circumstances. Incantations could be recited over sick and dying children, and amulets could be placed around their necks. There were spells to help pregnancies go smoothly and to drive demons away from the mother. The placebo effect may well have led to some real-world effect from these rituals, but just as important in the sense of agency, they must have given women at such dangerous points in their lives. These aspects of the demons and the spells that could be worked to keep them away from the children or the sickly infant were passed down from women to women for thousands of years. They survived well into the 20th century, almost unchanged over the millennia, a testament to the desperation of women attempting to survive one of the most dangerous things you could do in a pre-modern world, bury a child. So while this book is a story of a demonic tradition, a family tree of seductive, child-killing monsters, it is also the story of women and womanhood, of the dangers of childbirth, of attitudes to female sexuality, of women fighting for their rights. This is the true woman's lore. Not just a tool of seduction as in Keane's Lamia, but a tradition kept alive by women that tells the story of women's lives from 2000 BC to the present day. There are two caveats to all of this. The first of these is that I will be using terms like demons and monsters fairly interchangeably to refer to the creatures described in this book. This is despite the fact that in, say, ancient Greece, the figures discussed there would certainly not have been thought as demons, which was then a term that specifically referred to guiding spirits, or in Mesopotamia, Lamashtu is technically a goddess. There is simply no space to closely examine the specific supernatural belief system of every period under discussion. Demons or monsters, as they used here, should be understood as the modern sense of malignant supernatural entities. The second caveat is that every one of the following chapters could be a book on itself. There is so much to say about these creatures, who are often largely unknown in the modern day, so many stories to tell that it felt almost impossible to stop writing about some of them. But the purpose of this book is to trace the history of the entire tradition, so the deepest dives into each individual demonic figure had to be put aside in order to understand the whole. If you want to read more about these creatures, and I strongly suggest you do, they are absolutely fascinating, do explore the selected bibliography. I should also like to issue a trigger warning. Inevitably, this book contains discussion of infant and maternal death. These issues affect a huge portion of the population. I've tried to steer away from the detailed description of births gone wrong and dying children, but there are plenty of people who would not want to read this book, or who are at a stage in their life where it could be extremely upsetting. There you go, the warning. You've been warned. With these warnings borne in mind, we can turn into the very first member of our demonic family, the grand matriarch of them all, Lamashtu. The cradle of civilization. The flat, arid plains of Mesopotamia, which roughly corresponds to modern Iraq, with a bit of Syria thrown in, are dotted with thousands of mounds. Some are so low as to barely perceptible. Others span many hectares and are hundreds of feet high, like mountains region grafted onto a surrounding plains. These mounds are entirely man-made, formed from the accumulated debris of millennia of inhabitation. The smallest of them marks site of limited occupation, perhaps a minor village that lasted a handful of decades. The largest are the ruins of vast and ancient cities. Within these mounds you can find everything from libraries of clay tablets and palatial stone sculptures to the meanest ancient slums. But plunge a spade into one, and you are all but guaranteed to come across two things: mud brick and remains of dead infants. The mud brick should come as no surprise. It was the principal construction material of Mesopotamia. The proliferation of child remains, on the other hand, might initially feel stranger, not to mention sadder. Dig under a house floor, and you are bound to come across at least some. Although, since babies' bones are softer than those of adults, the skull will often have crumbled to dust, and even the legs and arms bone can flake away if you are not careful. Normally, these little half-bodies are found in dirt-filled jars, and the jars don't seem to have been especially made for the occasion. Some are far too big for the job, others are far too small. One of my most vivid memories from time spent excavating at the ancient site of Tel Brak in eastern Syria is unearthing a baby packed into a lidded pot about the size and shape of Le Creuset casserole dish. Its spine curved unnaturally so its little body could fit inside. It was one of the 3 infants' burial excavated in the small trench that season. This is a practice found in the ancient world well beyond Mesopotamia. Child jar burials were common in ancient Greece and Rome as well. Even in areas of industry and manufacture, child skeletons turn up under the floors. This is a quite dramatic section, but a very real one. Not only infant mortality was very high, many times unwanted children were also unalived intentionally, obviously, and just left, in specific places. Anyway, who would have thought that this would have this kind of deep and sad development? Anyway, but I am still enjoying it, although this is a very serious subject. The sheer quantity of burials might seem shocking, but it's well in line with pre-modern mortality rates. Prior to the development of modern medicine, the chance of a child dying before adulthood is normally estimated at around 35%. To all of the people who say that vaccines and all of that doesn't work, there you go. On the other side of the strategy is less evident in the archaeology. Unlike infants, women's bodies blend into cemeteries with little to distinguish their circumstances of their death. But it's estimated that women had around an 8% chance of dying in childbirth right up until the 20th century, and we know that childbirth itself would have been an even more brutal, dangerous experience than it is today. Without advanced surgical tools, medicine, and knowledge, for example, breech babies could not be safely delivered. Infections post-pregnancy were rampant and usually untreatable, while hemorrhages and conditions like eclampsia, where high blood pressure causes seizures during pregnancy, would have caused numerous deaths. This doesn't even take into account the sorrows of miscarriages and infertility. Even today, around 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage, and an experience that was taboo for all but the most recent generations of women. Yes. There is little in the way of letters and literature to reflect the personal stories behind these grim statistics, but the horror, fear, and pain that they inspired are revealed vividly in one collection of sources in ancient Mesopotamia. Texts concerning demons, incantations, and exorcism, especially those related to one particular figure, the terrible child and mother-killing demoness, Lamashtu. While she is little known today, for centuries she was the most powerful demoness in Mesopotamian tradition. A figure so formidable and important that her lore was passed down almost unchanged for over a millennium, inspiring fear over an enormous geographical area and at all levels of society, and standing preeminent above all other Mesopotamian monsters. This terrifying and fearsome creature was the foundational matriarch of the tradition that this book will trace, a vivid reflection of the lives of women and the horrors they faced before the advent of modern medicine. There are dozens of texts that concern Lamashtu, scattered across the 3,000 odd years of ancient Mesopotamian history. But the most comprehensive surviving collection of them, and the best introduction to Lamashtu herself, comes from the library of Ashurbanipal. In 630 BC, the Neo-Assyrian Empire was at its height. stretching from the Zagros mountain of eastern Iraq through to Egypt and the Levant and to Egypt and the Levant. What is the Levant? I bet it's a place. And up into Turkey. It was larger and more powerful than any empire the world had yet seen. Its capital, Nineveh, the Library of Nineveh, Shad, was a sprawling metropolis dominated by a massive citadel rising in its easterly extent, circled by a tributary of the river Tigris, and perfectly placed to catch what little wind there was in the furiously hot summers. Atop this citadel was a chaotic assortment of temples and palaces built of baked clay bricks, their entracement flanked by gigantic stone bull men, and their corridors and rooms lined with 6-foot-high stone friezes inscribed with the accomplishments of Assyrian kings. The king in 630 BC, Ashurbanipal, had more than enough martial successes to fill all his friezes, but he also had a hobby. He was a scholar. In his palace, the Northwest Palace, he amassed one of the greatest libraries in the ancient world. It contained everything from incantations to omen decipherments to great epics. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the finest pieces of ancient Mesopotamian literature, was here, along with complete copies of such famous works as Enuma, Anu, and Lil, an astrological omen series, Enuma Elish, an epic of the god Marduk, and Maklu, a set of rituals for removing negative magic, as well as many thousands of other treasures. How I wish I could read those. All of these texts were inscribed with reed styluses on tablets made of clay, in a wedge-shaped writing known as cuneiform. The handwriting is beautifully standardized and precise, and many of the tablets have a line at the end proclaiming that they belong to the collection of Ashurbanipal. Even among these great works of literature, one set of incantations stands out, a gigantic 600-line text attested in 3 copies and consisting of 15 incantations for driving away a particularly awful monster. The creature described in this text is a goddess, daughter of one of the most important deities in the Mesopotamian pantheon, the sky god, Anu, but cast out of the divine company for expressing her desire to poison babies and small children. She has the wings of an eagle, the talons of the bird, the head of a lion or a dog, and the tongue and teeth of a donkey. Interesting combination. She dresses in rags and lives in swamps and other wild, desolate places. Nothing and no one seems to be safe from her. She strikes down young men and women and stalks livestock. Even walls become dirty when she leans on them. However, men and animals are fairly minor concerns for her. Her principal interest is in mothers and their babies. She poses as nursemaid and suckles children on her poisonous breast milk, okay? She watches pregnant women counting down the days until they give birth and then blocks their birth canal or reaches inside them with her terrifying long fingers and drags out the babies prematurely. She clasps babies' bellies with her 7 talon-like fingers and sickens them. She causes miscarriages and death in childbirth. In the Akkadian language, this horrific creature was called Lamashtu. The text describes numerous ways of exercising Lamashtu, most of which are long and complex. There's only one that takes less than 3 days. Wow. In one case, the exorcist makes figurines of Lamashtu and then destroys them. One is burned, one is buried in the city gate, and one is left in the wilderness beyond the cultivated farmland, along with provisions for her journey like a water bag, food, a comb, and a spindle. Stones and plants in various combinations can be tied in a bag around the patient's neck, and depictions of Lamashtu can be drawn on the walls of the victim's room. One incantation advises the exorcist to make clay figurines of dogs and place them at the doors of the sick's room. Wonderfully, clay models of dogs have actually been discovered buried under the floors of ancient Assyrian palaces, and most of them have cuneiform inscriptions written on the side like "Expeller of Evil" and "Catcher of the Enemy," just in case there was any doubt that these were apotropaic tools associated with these kinds of rituals. The tablets recording Lamashtu's incantations in the library of Ashurbanipal are called the canonical Lamashtu incantation series by modern scholars, and represent the most complete surviving record of the demon and the measures taken to protect against her. All 3 copies from the library and an almost identical copy from a nearby temple have survived more or less intact because of an invented side effect of writing on clay. Exposure to fire breaks the tablets, perfectly preserving them. When the Neo-Assyrian Empire fell in 609 BC, only 18 years after Ashurbanipal's death, Nineveh was sacked, and the Northwest Palace and its library were burned to the ground. The tablets stayed where they fell, buried by the collapsed palace, until they were excavated over 2,000 years later by the archaeologist Hormuzd Rassam, and carted off wholesale to the British Museum, of course, because if anything is missing from history, please someone go and look in the British Museum. No, but seriously. And yeah, as always, there's the sad tradition of burning everything once you are conquering the new location, right? It's not only sad, it's revolting to me. Anyway, I'm not gonna go into that. British Museum. However, although the Neo-Assyrian Empire may seem old enough by modern standards, by the time of Ashurbanipal's library and the canonical incantation series Lamashtu was already ancient. Spells had been worked against her for over 1,000 years. The god Anu begot her. The god Ea raised her. The god Enlil gave her the face of a dog. She was hardly any palms, but long fingers, and very long claws. She enters the house through the door. She slithers in like a snake. After slithering by the door sockets, she saw the baby. She grabbed him in a belly 7 times. Pulled out your claws, loosen the grip of your arms before a valiant exorcist with regard of Ea's craft overcomes you. The door socket is wide for you. The doors are wide open. Go and roam about in the wilderness. I will fill your mouth with dust, your face with drifting sand, your eyes with tiny cress seeds. I herewith conjure you by the curse of Ea. Begone. This is one of the very oldest known incantations against Lamashtu. It dates around 2000 BC. At this time, Assyria was a minor player on the political scene, a provincial backwater, albeit one with excellent trading networks, and centuries away from its empires. Even Babylon itself had only just risen to preeminence under the rule of Hammurabi, the famous lawmaker king. At 15 lines, this little text is considerably shorter than the canonical Lamashtu series, but it packs in plenty of information. Lamashtu here is born and raised by gods, an important one, at that Anu, the sky god, and the father of all, or most, of the pantheon in Mesopotamia, and the next ones. Enlil, the god of the air, and Ea, a trickster-ish god of fresh water and wisdom. Together they give Lamashtu a terrifyingly powerful pedigree and an impressive divine heritage. In fact, the word demon isn't quite correct when applied to Lamashtu, although since it's the best description of her role, I'll continue to use it. She is in fact a goddess. The text stresses this even further by writing her name with a divine determinative, a star-shaped marker which indicates that the name which follows it is of a god. Most Mesopotamian gods are human in appearance, but this incantation describes Lamashtu as a hybrid animal monster. She has a head of a dog, coupled with snaky and slithery attributes. However, the main focus is on her hands, which are described as having clawed fingers so long that there is hardly any palm, an image so specific it feels genuinely creepy. Old Babylonian amulets depict Lamashtu in exactly the way she is described here. She normally has a dog's head, and she's often holding snakes, but it's the hands that get the most attention. Scratched into clay or beautifully carved on stone, her spiky clawed fingers are shown longer than her face, sometimes even longer than her torso. She often has 7 of these hideously long fingers on each hand, a feature suggested in this incantation by the fact that she grabs her victims 7 times. The emphasis on her hands makes sense because despite her snakiness and her dog head, her chosen method of doing harm is to plunge her hand into the child's abdomen. This short, dense description is a means of identifying the demon through her parentage, her appearance, and her behavior, a way of pinning her down and making sure that the incantation is correctly targeted. What follows next is a command spoken directly to Lamashtu, insisting that she releases the child she has seized. Threatened with the arrival of a skilled exorcist, she is told to roam in the steppe, a place that was viewed as the wilderness outside of civilization, and therefore the proper place for demons and ghosts. The speaker then issues the almost pitifully vicious taunt that the demon's eyes will be filled with sand and cress seeds and her mouth with dust. Finally, she is invoked by the god Ea in his role as an exorcist and ordered to be gone. There are 8 other surviving Lamashtu incantations, which date from about the same time as this one. These 8 texts, some of which are far more fragmentary than the one above, give us bits and pieces of additional information about the demon. One expands on her estrangement from the other gods, detailing how her father Anu threw her out of their company because of her malicious ideas and improper spirit. Others expand a little on her iconography, giving her donkey's teeth as well as the dog's head. and a third describes in more details her attacks on mothers, claiming that she counts the months of pregnant women, constantly blocking the doors, that is, the birth canal of women about to give birth. In these 9 incantations, then, Lamashtu has a fixed iconography. The head of a dog, perhaps donkey's teeth, and an overall snake-like quality. She has a specific area of influence, babies and pregnant women. She even has a parentage and backstory. She is fairly coherent throughout the incantations, an impressive feat, given that these texts are from across Mesopotamia, and some sort of geographical variation might be expected. Even more astonishing is how similar the Lamashtu of these earliest texts is to the Lamashtu described in the canonical incantation series. It's not just that she murders babies and their mothers. In both, she has the teeth of the donkey, long fingers and claws, slips in by door sockets like a snake, and is banished into the wilderness. In both, she is cast out of heavens by her father, the god Anu. Some passages are reproduced almost verbatim. The series, for example, contains the following lines, nearly identical to those from one of the old Babylonian inscriptions above, from 1,000 years before. She returns to the woman whose doors are blocked. The daughter of Anu counts the pregnant women daily, keeps following behind those about to give birth. She counts their months, marks the day on the wall. Mesopotamian history and society over the millennium that separated the series from the first recorded incantations was far from static. Vast empires rose and fell. There were many periods of peace and periods of near constant warfare, periods of internal focus and periods when Mesopotamia was part of a diplomatic network which included Egypt, Turkey, Europe, and the Persian Gulf. Groups of immigrants came, were despised, and then integrated, ready to hate the next incoming group. Literature, science, mathematics all moved in the leaps and bounds. At that the Lamashtu incantations and rituals survived through a millennium of upheavals, that they were passed down almost unchanged for centuries, shows that their extraordinary importance and highlights how vital they were as the principal method of defending women and children from the nightmares of infant and maternal mortality. Preserving a tradition for centuries might be difficult, but in this case, how could it not be worthwhile? So again, we have here our first demoness, goddess Lamashtu, and as we may see, she, as a description, as a goddess, and incantations to again protect women and children from her are kept almost the same. So there is obviously written record, but it's not easy to keep things the same over 1,000 years. We can see it in other contexts very much, right? For instance, the library of Nineveh was burned, but Lamashtu and her incantations are still there, and they are still the same. I know that the subject is very grim, but I am liking it very much. I don't know, maybe I have time to read a little bit more, but let's see. Lamashtu seems fully formed in the old Babylonian period, so it could be sensible to start looking for her origins in the written documents of the millennium of Mesopotamian history and culture prior to this. A small selection of incantations do survive from this time, and one demon name is in particular out, Dime. There are two principal languages which appear in the writing of ancient Mesopotamia: Akkadian in various dialects and Sumerian, a language that was certainly dead by the end of the 3rd millennium, but which continued to be used as a scholarly language long afterwards, much like medieval Latin. In all Lamashtu texts from the Old Babylonian period on, Dime is given as the Sumerian equivalent to the Akkadian Lamashtu. Sometimes the name Dime is suggested as the translation of Lamashtu in links to Akkadian words with their Sumerian equivalents. Sometimes it's given as one of the demoness's names. Occasionally, Dime is just used interchangeably with Lamashtu. With the name Dime attested back into the 3rd millennium BC, it might seem that we should seek the origin of Lamashtu there. However, the 3rd millennium Dime has nothing in common with the 2nd millennium Lamashtu. Instead, she is shifting, amorphous creature with no fixed identity, iconography, or area of influence. Dime might even be a generic word for a ghost in this period. In fact, these creatures are so different that it seems likely that the two names were only attached in the 2nd millennium. It is clear that Lamashtu's fall from heaven, her obsession with harming women and babies, and her iconography are all new, all or at least newly recorded, when she first appears in the text of Old Babylonian period. There is one possibility that would answer these difficulties. The early 2nd millennium saw a massive influx into Mesopotamia of an immigrant group known as Amorites. These immigrants were scorned by the settled Mesopotamians and derived as savages who barely knew how to eat bread, let alone live in a city. Apparently, neither of these activities was particularly difficult to master because, within a few generations, Amorites were integrated into Mesopotamian society and rose to extremely prominent positions. Hammurabi himself is likely to have been an Amorite. In most cases, immigrants were absorbed into Mesopotamian culture without any particular impact. Hammurabi behaved exactly like a normal Mesopotamian king, and it's only his name that tells us otherwise. Hammurabi means the king's man is the healer. The king's man is the healer in Amorite. Because of this, it's easy to underestimate any impact these immigrant groups might have had on the pre-existing Mesopotamian culture. However, the sudden appearance of an apparently new demon, and as we shall see, one entirely unlike any normal Mesopotamian demon of this time, in a period which is also noted for the influx of a new immigrant group, is interesting. Perhaps the Amorites brought Lamashtu with them. Perhaps she, like they, slipped into existing traditions and was integrated into the Mesopotamian pantheon. If this were the case, her connection with the ancient demon name Dime may have been an attempt to give her an appropriately Mesopotamian pedigree, rather than because Lamashtu had anything particularly in common with this vague, shifting creature. An Amorite origin for Lamashtu is speculative, but, however, she was introduced to Mesopotamia. One thing is clear: she was seized upon instantly. She goes from entirely unattested in the 3rd millennium to appearing in texts and on amulets across Mesopotamia in the early 2nd. It suggests that she was grasped immediately by people who were desperate for the protection that spells against her could offer. Lamashtu also spread beyond Mesopotamia itself. In Ugarit, a port city in what is now Syria, a slightly incompetent Akkadian scribe wrote down an error-filled set of incantations against her. In fact, this is the first example we have of what scholars call a compilation Lamashtu text, a collection of multiple different incantations and a precursor of the huge compilation represented by the canonical incantation series. Although, given the quality of the scribe's work, it seems likely he was copying of someone else, as opposed to making it up of himself. There's even a broken text that suggests Lamashtu rituals were being copied in the libraries of Hattusa, the capital of the Hittite Empire, in modern Turkey. We have amulets to back up this range as well. Lamashtu amulets have been found in the Levant, and in the southeast of modern Turkey. However, although these texts and amulets suggest a widespread of Lamashtu beliefs, there isn't much evidence for any changes of her tradition as she traveled beyond Mesopotamia. At least in the case of the text, some of this lacks a change may be Some of this lack of change may be because Akkadian was the lingua franca of the Near East for much of the 2nd millennium BC. Even the Egyptian king Tutankhamun included, used it to write letters to their Levantine vassals, despite the fact that neither party would have had Akkadian as the mother tongue. Interesting. First time I hear it. This means it possible that the Lamashtu texts in Ugarit and Hattusa, which happened to date to the 2nd millennium BC, represent the spread of Mesopotamian scribal culture, native scribes learning Akkadian by copying the rituals, for example, or Mesopotamia-born Akkadian speakers traveling with them. The text may not say much about how Lamashtu was perceived by the local populations, though. A single text from Emar, a city in northern Syria on the great bend of the Euphrates, is more exciting. Written by a scribe who apparently thought nothing of adding random cuneiform signs just for the fun of it, it is an absolute mess, riddled with errors and inconsistencies, and is painfully difficult to read. However, the mess is what makes it interesting. It means that its author probably was neither an Akkadian scribe nor copying from an original Akkadian tablet. This suggests that there was an independent Lamashtu tradition in Emar, and that it wasn't wholly dependent on Akkadian scribal culture. Lamashtu and the protection offered by spells against her was so important that belief in her had gone beyond the borders of Mesopotamia and into the wider Near East. Okay, I think I'm going to stop here, not only because we already read quite a bit, but also because my voice is kind of wanting to fail me. At this point, I've learned a lot. Lamashtu, Dime, how Mesopotamian culture, empire spread, grew, etc. How it translated into, again, Akkadian, Babylonian, Persian, etc. Very interesting. So I'm not only learning about the demons, but also about a whole other set of things. Again, I don't know what I'm looking. Anyway, I think it's best that I look at myself, because otherwise I don't know how it's gonna look. Anyway, I enjoyed reading it. Hope you did as well. If you didn't, let me know. That's okay. I mean, I can read it during my own time and not during the screen time. Either way, feels good to be back. If you're still here, I don't know, leave a I don't even know. leave an emoji, leave a star emoji. I'm wearing this dress that I got recently. I was going to, like, it has stars and moons and like this golden droplet pattern. It's very like flowy and whatever, so I'm feeling very fancy. Anyway, so leave a star in the comments if you are still here, and of course if you are happy to leave a comment. In any case, thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time. Bye.